Zacks, 910 here, Big 550, KTRS. Welcome in the audience who's watching on KPLR 11.2. Don't forget our app. Also, STLtoday.com, and you can certainly watch us online, yell at us on Facebook. Talk a little Blues hockey a little bit later on. We also got Gabe Crocker in the green room. Gabe Crocker, St. Louis County Police Detective, also St. Louis County President of the Union. They're upset that you can make $48,000 being the starting salary for a Panda Express manager and $48,000 for the starting salary for a St. Louis County police officer. So we'll check in with him a little bit later on. But what are you doing Thursday night? I got something for you to do Thursday night. Go to the St. Louis County Library. Our next guest will be there talking about his brand new book, and you are going to have a great time. His name is Richard Zacks. He's an author and a historian. His newest book is called Chasing the Last Laugh, Mark Twain's raucous and redemptive around-the-world comedy tour. Richard, welcome to Big 550 KTRS here in St. Louis.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You betcha. All right, so short story, the premise of the book is Mark Twain was broke and he needed money.
Absolutely. He could be America's the world's worst investor. I mean, this man was uncanny. Anything he touched, he lost money on. He started his own publishing company to pay himself big royalties. He got zero royalties. He backed a machine with 18,000 movable parts. Thing wound up never working. So all of a sudden, he's broke. He's $80,000 in debt, and his wife wants him to pay it back in full. I mean, everyone else is hiding behind bankruptcy laws, and this man has to pay it all back. And the only way he can do it at age 60 is go out and do a stand-up comedy tour. And he went around the world.
All right. So how much at the height of his debt? How much did he owe?
It was $80,000, but that's $3.2 million today. You know, when you think about it, writers to come up with $3.2 million in a hurry. I mean, he could have kept the family, eating breakfast and living in a house, but he couldn't come up with that kind of money without doing something extreme. And what people don't realize is, we always think of Mark Twain performing. He actually hated performing. He got unbelievably nervous and tense beforehand, and most of it was because he didn't want to seem like a clown. He just didn't, want to be the guy that was only there for laughs. He thought of himself as a great writer.
How much money did he make over the course of his life? Did he make more than $3.2 million?
Well, here's the deal. I did some math, and he probably lost more money than he made, at least through the first 60 years of his life. And he made a ton of money. I mean, it was really hard to do. Basically, he married an heiress. He married one of the wealthiest women, who was in Elmira, New York. Her father owned this massive coal empire. And so Twain lived off her money, lived in a big house. And she paid the weekly bills. They had 7 servants. They had a butler. They had a coachman, all this good stuff. And Twain was just free to make the money through his writing and invest it. And he was addicted to gambling on startups. I mean, he lost money on just a whole pile of, and he also thought of himself as an inventor. And only one of his inventions actually made money.
Did he ever, did any of those investments ever pay off?
Well, yeah, a couple of them did. I mean, he invented the Mark Twain scrapbook. I don't know if people know about it. I think it's really cool. He wrote the funniest ad for it about like how his scrapbook would reduce cursing in America, because basically, everyone were filling scrapbooks. They had the glue was dry, the glue was stuck to your fingers, the scissor got stuck in the glue, all this stuff. Mark Twain actually invented a scrapbook that had thin lines of dried glue on the page, and you took like a sponge or a damp cloth and you moistened it, and the glue came alive, and you just dropped your photograph or your newspaper clip right down onto it. And it actually was a brilliant idea, and he patented it. The only trouble was he succeeded in finding a con man hustler to market it for him, a guy named Dan Sloat, who conned him out of basically all the profits to do a thing called Kaola type, which was this ridiculous engraving process that didn't have a prayer of working. They were building an imaginary factory in Brooklyn to build the thing. So the good news is his invention made money, but he found a way to lose it all. So
the book is called Chasing the Last Laugh, Thursday night, St. Louis County Library, 7 o'clock for a book signing and a book reading. Richard Zacks. So you did the story of Mark Twain's World Comedy Tour.
Absolutely. He went to 71 different cities, 122 performances, and the amazing thing is, well, first off, that it could be forgotten. Here's this guy, maybe arguably the most famous writer in American history, and he did a round the world tour, and nobody knows much about it. He went to Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa, and the good news for him was he was feeling really low. He was feeling really angry at himself over losing all that money, and he got embraced as the greatest American. I mean, he just got standing room only crowds around the world for the most part.
Now, how much of that propelled his legacy all these many years later?
I would argue that this is the key moment because what people don't realize, he was considered a humorist. He was America's great funny man. And that, when he came back from the trip, he kind of reached the next level because America was an insecure country, and we tended to worship the foreign performers like Paderewski and Jenny Lin. I mean, Twain said about like certain Americans, I wish they had been European so that we'd embrace them. It was just that kind of country to a certain extent, especially in the arts. So Twain comes back, and all the clips, because of the Telegraph, all the clips have been filtering in of the great performances in Melbourne and Sydney and Pretoria, and he came back and he paid all his debts. And no one in that era, no businessman, was paying 100 cents on the dollar after what was basically called the Panic of 1893. I mean, everyone took advantage of the laws. I mean, you think of a certain politician running for president today. I mean, people take advantage of the bankruptcy laws. And Twain paid in full, and newspapers couldn't believe it. It was front page news when he came back, and I would argue, it completely resurrected his career. We might not be talking about Huck Finn today.
Richard Zacks, this story, I don't want to say it was lost to history, but it's not well known. How did you go about researching the book?
Well, I caught an incredible break. The Mark Twain Papers out in Berkeley are this amazing place that's actually trying to collect either the original or a copy of every single word Mark Twain ever wrote. And they're doing this crazy great job, and they released the autobiography recently,
Sure.
But they're only up to 1891 for the notebooks, and my whole story takes place from 1895 to 1900. So I had access in transcripts to all this unpublished material, and some of it is some of it he censored himself. So some of it's a little naughty, some of Twain's erotic writings. I got to look at some of his maxims that were just a little too raw about, I think he has one that, I'm paraphrasing, but if Jesus came back today, the one thing is certain, he would not be a Christian. I mean, lines like that,
right.
that people haven't seen. So I caught a break, I think.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Now, when he was, you said he paid off all of his debts. Was he then in the black afterwards?
Well, only Mark Twain could do this. He just was addicted to risk, and his wife really didn't encourage him to play poker for money and billiards and the rest of it. So he put it all into startups, and he found a new startup in it's right around 1901, called Plasmon, a protein powder basically made from dairy waste, and he claimed it had 16 times the protein value of steak. And he backed Plasmon to $30,000, which is like $1 million basically in modern currency. And he got completely hustled on it. And the guy that hustled him was a guy named Butters, Mr. Butters. So Twain is in court just complaining. Not only did he get hustled out of $1 million, but by a man named Butters. It's just worse. He said Butters was receiving $12,000 a year in salary. He should have gotten $3 a century. And that Butters was a stallion in intention, a eunuch in action. They promised to let me in on the ground floor. There was no ground floor. I mean, Twain, I think the reason he's so funny is he was living at such extremes. He wanted to be so respectable, but he was just addicted to gambling, and the only way it came out is in jokes, basically.
How much of the reporting and how much were you able to find out about how he was received by these audiences all around the world?
Well, what's so great, I mean, nowadays with the internet, back in the day you had to literally write a note to a librarian in New Zealand, and you got back some faded photocopy. But nowadays, literally the New Zealand libraries and the Australian libraries have complete online newspaper files. So I was able to get the reviews and, get little anecdotes right from the performance. I mean, a couple performances, people passed out from laughing so hard. They worried about medical emergencies. Some other performances, dogs were allowed in the theaters in Australia and New Zealand, except for in the dress circle. So there were a couple of dog fights that had to be, settled before Twain could continue with the show. It was really great reading he got 98% positive reviews, and it was just great to read the original and see how he's received.
Chasing the Last Laugh. Richard Zacks is our guest. He's going to be at St. Louis County Library on Thursday night. Last question for you. Who is Bainbridge Colby?
It's kind of funny. Twain's going into bankruptcy, basically, and under the law then, it was called voluntary assignment, so you assign a lawyer to handle the thing for you. So they assign a 23-year-old Bainbridge Colby, who is they think they can manipulate because he's so young, and he's at a prestigious law firm. And it turns out that he just refuses to handle Twain's thing, and Twain just calls him like in line for head idiot of the century, and maybe we'll drop carpet tacks in his way to get him moving, and all this kind of stuff. So Twain hates him. Colby doesn't do a good job with Twain's case, and then Bainbridge Colby goes on to be Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson.
Richard Zacks, this is a movie waiting to happen. Any Hollywood people knocking on your door?
Actually, one did. I had drinks with a guy Friday night who's real interested, who might hand it to some top actor who I'm not supposed to name, but it would be pretty wild if this guy was interested. So that'd be fun.
It sounds like it could be a great story. It sounds like a hidden treasure chest of an unknown part of Mark Twain's life. Richard Zacks is our guest. The book is called Chasing the Last Laugh, Mark Twain's raucous and redemptive round-the-world comedy tour. Did any of your research take you to Hannibal, Missouri?
Actually, it didn't, because I wound up, I'm dealing with so much later in his life. I mean, we're dealing from just a short time period, 1895 to 1900. And in my defense, I've also found that if you go to modern places, they tend to color you in ways that you get the story a little wrong. Sometimes it's really better to use the contemporary eyewitness stuff and keep it in the flavor of the period, than seeing some rundown, something modern building.
Sure. Well, I have a feeling you'll probably be invited to Hannibal here in the next couple of months at some point. Richard Zacks, the book is called Chasing the Last Laugh. Richard, have a safe trip into St. Louis, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thursday night, St. Louis County Library, another one of the Buzz Westfall series. This is a great one. Should be packed and a whole lot of fun. Thursday night, 7 o'clock, County Library on Lindbergh, right next to Schneidhorst there. Richard Zacks, the author of Chasing the Last Laugh. 9:23 here, Big 5.